It began with a $40 late fee, a bold idea, a red envelope. They offered Blockbuster a lifeline. But from rejection came Netflix. And one man, Reed Hastings, would change the way the world watches.
On a fall morning in the year 2000, two entrepreneurs flew to Dallas for a last-chance meeting that could decide their company's fate. Reed Hastings, a soft-spoken but determined founder, and his partner, Mark Randolph, entered the conference room at Blockbuster's headquarters in t-shirts and jeans. A sharp contrast to the suit-clad executives across the table, Blockbuster Video was the colossus of home entertainment at the time with thousands of stores nationwide. Hastings' young company Netflix was an upstart mailing DVDs in red envelopes to a modest subscriber base. The dot-com bubble was bursting and Netflix was bleeding cash. Hastings had a Hail Mary proposal. Blockbuster would buy Netflix for $50 million and make it their online arm. In return, Blockbuster could focus on its retail stores while Netflix ran the internet side of the business. It was an appeal to join forces, the old guard and the new, to create something greater together. John Antioco, Blockbuster's CEO, listened politely. To Hastings' face, he expressed skepticism. "The dot-com hysteria is overblown," Antioco said, dismissing the viability of online businesses in the year 2000. When the $50 million price was finally mentioned, Antioco couldn't suppress a smirk. Netflix's offer was so far-fetched to him that he was struggling not to laugh. In the end, Blockbuster flat-out rejected the deal effectively, laughing Hastings and Randolph out of the room. For the Netflix founders, it was a stinging humiliation, a moment that could have crushed their dream. Instead, walking out of Blockbuster's offices that day, Hastings felt a steely resolve take hold. As Mark Randolph later recalled during the quiet plane ride home, Hastings and his team came to a defiant conclusion. If Blockbuster wouldn't join them, Netflix would beat Blockbuster. That pivotal meeting, the moment Blockbuster balked at Netflix, has since become startup legend. It captures the classic David versus Goliath story, a scrappy innovator dismissed by an industry giant. The irony, of course, would reveal itself in hindsight. Within a decade, Blockbuster would topple into bankruptcy, a victim of the very digital revolution Hastings had foreseen. By 2022, Netflix had grown into a streaming behemoth, generating nearly $30 billion in annual revenue, while Blockbuster had vanished, surviving only as a single nostalgic store in Bend, Oregon. The laughable startup idea that Blockbuster once scoffed at ended up revolutionizing how the world watches movies and TV. How did Reed Hastings lead Netflix from humble rejection to global dominance? The answer lies in his extraordinary journey, from a Peace Corps volunteer navigating remote African roads to a software entrepreneur learning hard-won lessons in leadership, and ultimately to a visionary CEO who dared to disrupt his own successful business model before anyone else could. This is a story of strategic foresight, bold innovation, and an unshakable belief in the power of technology to reshape consumer habits. It is also a story of failure and resilience, near bankruptcy, public missteps, and crises of confidence, all of which helped shape Netflix's unique culture. Through it all, Hastings exemplifies the traits of a true innovator: adaptability, the courage to challenge the status quo, and even the willingness to cannibalize his own legacy in pursuit of a greater future. In this documentary narrative, we'll chart Reed Hastings' path and Netflix's evolution. From the simple idea sparked by an overdue video fee to the radical notion of mailing DVDs to the audacious leap into streaming when the world wasn't ready for it. We'll see how Hastings bet big on unproven ideas, that people would stream movies over the internet, that they would happily binge-watch entire seasons if you dropped all episodes at once, that a tech company could successfully produce its own award-winning shows. We'll also explore the culture Hastings built at Netflix, a culture of freedom and responsibility, that shattered corporate conventions and empowered innovation. And we'll witness the ripple effects of Hastings' vision, an entertainment landscape utterly transformed, where streaming is now the norm, and where Netflix and chill has entered the cultural lexicon as a shorthand for on-demand entertainment. Hastings' story is as inspiring as it is insightful. It's about recognizing the winds of change and having the courage to set sail into uncharted waters. It's about an entrepreneur who turned a personal frustration into a worldwide movement, and in doing so, changed the way billions of hours of content are consumed every day. From DVD mailers to bandwidth and bites from Hollywood soundstages to living rooms around the globe, this is the journey of Reed Hastings and the streaming revolution he launched. Early life and the entrepreneurial spark. Reed Hastings' road to revolution began far from Silicon Valley or Hollywood. Born in 1960 and raised in Boston, young Reed grew up with a mix of privilege and grounded values. His father was a lawyer in Nixon's administration, his mother, an idealistic Boston debutante who taught her children to disdain stuffy high society pretenses. Hastings' upbringing instilled in him a sense of adventure and independence. After high school, he took an unconventional detour. He sold vacuum cleaners door to door for a time, toughening his skin for rejection, before pursuing mathematics at Bowdoin College. Upon graduating in the early 1980s, rather than jumping straight into a career, Hastings sought adventure and purpose abroad. He joined the Peace Corps, a decision he later described as motivated by a combination of service and adventure. From 1983 to 1985, the fresh college grad found himself teaching high school math in rural Swaziland, now Eswatini in southern Africa. There, in a remote village classroom, Hastings not only taught algebra, but also learned some enduring lessons himself. He would later credit those years with shaping his entrepreneurial spirit. After all, once you have hitchhiked across Africa with $10 in your pocket, starting a business doesn't seem too intimidating. He quipped. The Peace Corps experience gave Hastings a fearlessness in the face of uncertainty and a willingness to chart his own course attributes that would prove vital in his business career. Returning to the U.S., Hastings continued his education, earning a master's in computer science from Stanford in 1988. The late 1980s were the dawn of the software industry boom, and Hastings was eager to be part of it. His first job was at a startup called Adaptive Technology, where he cut his teeth writing debugging tools for software engineers. It was here that Hastings met a mentor, Audrey McLean, who taught him the importance of focus in business. It's better to do one product well than two products in a mediocre way, she advised, a lesson Hastings took to heart. By 1991, Reed Hastings was ready to start his own company. He founded Pure Software, a startup building troubleshooting tools for software developers. As a first-time CEO in his early 30s, Hastings jumped in with enthusiasm and quickly found himself in over his head. Pure Software grew rapidly faster than Hastings expected. Headcount exploded, and Hastings, the engineer-turned-founder, struggled with the demands of managing a large team. He later admitted that he lacked managerial experience at the time, and even asked his board to replace him as CEO when the pressure mounted, confessing that he was losing confidence in his own leadership. The board refused, insisting he stay on, so Hastings buckled down and learned to be a businessman on the fly. It was a trial by fire. He had to evolve from a hands-on techie to a capable executive. Mistakes were made, but Hastings absorbed the hard lessons about hiring, scaling, and staying agile. Pure Software went public in 1995, and a year later merged with a rival, a combination that proved challenging. Integrating two companies was chaotic. Culture clashes and sales team turnover made the process messy. Hastings persevered, navigating the merged entity, now called Pure Atria, until 1997, when Rational Software acquired the company. The acquisition left Hastings reasonably wealthy. At just 37, he was suddenly a successful tech entrepreneur, who had seen both the ups and downs of running a company. It also left him momentarily unanchored, searching for the next big idea. In that transitional moment, Reed Hastings was ripe for a new challenge, one that would allow him to apply what he had learned at Pure Software about focused leadership and adapting to change. Little did he know that inspiration would strike from a mundane errand, a trip to the local video rental store. As Hastings has recounted, and perhaps embellished for effect, sometime in 1997, he rented a VHS copy of Apollo 13 from Blockbuster and forgot to return it on time. When the late fees ballooned to around $40, Hastings was aghast. "I had misplaced the cassette. It was all my fault. I didn't want to tell my wife," he admitted, half joking, that he feared marital strife over the hefty late fee. Driving to the gym the next day, Hastings had an epiphany. Why, he wondered, should renting movies be so punitive and inflexible? His gym had a much better business model, a flat monthly fee for unlimited use. You could pay $30 or $40 a month and work out as little or as much as you wanted, Hastings realized. And suddenly, he began to imagine a video rental service with a similar model. What if you could subscribe to rent movies by mail for a flat fee, with no due dates and no late fees? It was a revolutionary thought, liberating movie lovers from the oppressive rules of video stores. That fateful late fee receipt, as the story goes, planted the seed for Netflix. Reed Hastings began to envision an online service where customers could pick movies on a website and have them delivered to their home. No trips to the store, no late return penalties. At the time, two new technologies were just emerging to make this vision feasible. One was the DVD, a new disc format much smaller and lighter than clunky VHS tapes. DVDs had debuted in the late 90s, and unlike tapes, they could be mailed in slim envelopes without cracking. The second was the World Wide Web, which was exploding into the mainstream. Hastings saw the potential of combining the internet for ordering with the postal service for delivery. It was an idea at the intersection of old and new snail mail meets the internet. Hastings wasn't alone in this brainstorm. He teamed up with Mark Randolph, a fellow entrepreneur who had been a mentor figure to him and a former Pure Atria marketing director. In 1997, the two co-founded Netflix in California, determined to change the video rental game. They started with a simple test of their concept. Legend has it, Hastings and Randolph mailed a CD to Hastings' house to see if it would survive the trip without damage it did. DVDs by mail could work. With that, Netflix launched its website and service in 1998, offering a catalog of films that users could rent online and receive by mail in that iconic red envelope. Initially, Netflix operated on a paper rental model, much like a traditional video store. You paid for each disc you rented plus shipping. But remembering the gym membership insight, Hastings soon pivoted Netflix to a subscription model. For a flat monthly fee, subscribers could rent unlimited DVDs, 1 or 2 discs at a time with no late fees, ever. As soon as you mailed one back, the next title in your online queue would be sent. It was a game-changing idea that directly addressed customers' pain point: everyone hated late fees, and took advantage of the efficiency of online ordering. For movie lovers, this felt like a dream. No more Friday night trips to the video store, only to find the new release already checked out. No more rushing to return a DVD by 7 p.m. to avoid a fine. Netflix turned renting into a relaxed, on-your-own-time experience. Behind the scenes, Netflix built up a library of titles. By the early 2000s, they had 100,000 different DVDs in stock and a network of distribution centers, so that most customers got their discs within 1 or 2 business days. The little red envelope became a cultural icon in its own right, a welcome sight in subscribers' mailboxes, and a subtle symbol of the digital disruption to come. The road of trials, surviving and thriving in the DVD era. Netflix's DVD by mail service slowly but steadily gained traction in the late 1990s. Early on, Reed Hastings had no assurance that this crazy idea would truly catch on. When I founded Netflix, I had no idea whether customers would use the service, he admitted later. In fact, in the very beginning, Netflix was a niche luxury. Few people had DVD players yet in 1998, and getting online to browse a website was still a new behavior for many, but Hastings believed in the future. He and Randolph were convinced that DVD adoption would grow and that people would embrace the convenience of online shopping. They were right, but success didn't come overnight. By 1999, Netflix had introduced the all-you-can-rent subscription plans that truly differentiated it from Blockbuster. Subscribers could keep a DVD as long as they wanted. The only limitation was how many discs you could have out at a time. This model turned out to be addictive for movie buffs and families alike. It felt like having a video store on demand. Word spread, and Netflix's subscriber base climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Yet the company wasn't profitable. It was pouring money into buying DVDs, mailing them out, and building its logistics. As the dot-com bubble swelled in 1999 to 2000, Netflix was one of many tech startups burning cash in exchange for rapid growth. When the bubble burst, investor money dried up. Netflix, still a tiny private company, soon found itself in a financial crunch. By 2001, Netflix was struggling to stay afloat amidst a broader tech downturn. Reed Hastings faced the toughest moments of his leadership so far. With venture funding, scarce, Hastings had to make painful cuts. In a drastic move, Netflix laid off a third of its 120 employees that year to slash costs and survive. Nearly 40 people lost their jobs in one stroke, a devastating day internally. Hastings agonized over the layoffs, but emerged with a surprising observation. The smaller team that remained was exceptionally strong and motivated. Suddenly, with only the most adaptable and high-performing employees left, Netflix became more productive than ever. Hastings later described this period as the crucible in which Netflix's high-performance culture was forged. It taught him the value of what he called high talent density, the idea that a lean team of top talent can outperform a larger team that includes merely adequate performers. This revelation would inform how Hastings managed Netflix going forward, reinforcing his instinct to hire carefully, pay top of market, and cut loose those who didn't meet the bar. It was a harsh lesson, but one that shaped Netflix's ethos of excellence and agility. Even after slimming down, Netflix needed capital. Hastings decided to take the company public to raise funds. In May 2002, Netflix held its initial public offering IPO on NASDAQ, giving it a much-needed cash infusion. Still, compared to the Goliath of the industry, Blockbuster, Netflix was tiny. Blockbuster earned over $5 billion in revenue in 2001 from its 8,000-plus stores. Netflix in that year had under 1 million subscribers and was nowhere near profitability. Hastings knew that head-to-head competition against Blockbuster's retail empire would be daunting. So rather than advertising directly against Blockbuster, Netflix focused obsessively on making customers happy and growing by word of mouth. They refined their website's recommendation system, a precursor to the famous Netflix algorithm, to help users find films they'd love. They instituted policies anathema to traditional video rental, such as Netflix promises never to charge a late fee. And that became a selling point that hooked people who'd been burned by Blockbuster in the past. All the same, Blockbuster loomed large. Hastings did not underestimate the threat the brick-and-mortar giant posed. In fact, as we saw in the introduction, Hastings was open to a partnership or even an acquisition by Blockbuster if it would assure Netflix's survival and allow his vision to reach a wider audience. That led to the fateful meeting in 2000, where Blockbuster spurned Netflix's offer. After that rejection, Hastings had no choice but to compete full force. Netflix hunkered down, and went back to work determined to prove that the future belonged not to physical rental stores, but to the convenience of online selection and mail delivery. Over the next few years, Netflix's growth vindicated Hastings' belief. Subscribers kept signing up enticed by the simplicity of the service. Blockbuster belatedly noticed that Netflix was onto something and launched its own copycat online rental option in 2004, even eliminating late fees in a PR move to match Netflix's appeal. But Blockbuster was now playing on Netflix's terms, and doing so haltingly. The incumbent had huge overhead with its stores and couldn't pivot easily. By 2005, Netflix had crossed the 4 million subscriber mark and was continuing to expand, while Blockbuster's business model was under strain. One illustrative anecdote of Hastings' mindset during these years comes from an interviewer who asked him about Netflix's competition. Hastings replied that he wasn't just looking over his shoulder at other movie rental services. He saw the competition in much broader terms. You get a show or movie you're dying to watch, and you end up staying up late. So we actually compete with sleep, he said wryly. It was a revealing remark. Hastings viewed Netflix as competing for consumers' attention and time at large, not just against any one company. This expansive vision, that the real enemy was anything else people could be doing, even sleeping, drove Netflix to constantly improve and innovate, lest someone else capture that attention first. By the mid-2000s, the DVD by mail model that Netflix pioneered was clearly winning out over the old video store approach. Blockbuster's foot traffic was declining, and one by one, its stores began to close. In 2007, Blockbuster's CEO, John Antioco, who had laughed at Hastings' offer, was pushed out, and by 2010, Blockbuster Inc. filed for bankruptcy. The era of renting videos in a fluorescent-lit store was coming to an end. Netflix, on the other hand, had achieved profitability and passed 10 million subscribers by the end of the decade. Reed Hastings had taken an industry that seemed unassailable, the home video rental market, and turned it on its head through strategic patience and relentless customer focus. Yet even as he celebrated the success of the DVD business, Hastings was already looking to the future once again. In his mind, the Postal Service would only be a bridge to something even bigger. The internet was getting faster, and a new opportunity was on the horizon, one that would make mailing plastic discs seem as antiquated as the Blockbuster store model it replaced. Betting the company, the leap to streaming. For Reed Hastings, good was never good enough. Netflix's DVD service was booming by the mid-2000s, but he knew that technology marches on. The question nagging him was how people would want to watch movies in the coming decade. DVDs had outpaced VHS, but another transformation was imminent. The answer, Hastings believed, lay in the rise of broadband internet. If data speeds became fast enough, why would anyone need a physical disc at all? Movies and shows could be delivered as bits and bytes directly to your screen. Streaming video, essentially internet television, was a seemingly obvious next step, but it was fraught with challenges. Networks where slow studios were wary, and most consumers weren't even asking for it yet. Nonetheless, Hastings was convinced that streaming was the future of entertainment. In fact, the very name Netflix hinted at this destiny. Net for internet flicks for movies. He is a proponent of internet television and sees it as the future, a profile once noted of Hastings long before streaming became mainstream. Around 2005, Netflix quietly began research and development on how to deliver video over the web. Initially, the team explored a workaround for the era's limitations, a set-top Netflix box that subscribers could use to download movies overnight, ready to watch the next day. They even progressed far enough to develop the device and negotiate licensing rights. But then, something changed Hastings' thinking. YouTube. In 2005, YouTube burst onto the scene with grainy user-uploaded videos of skateboarding dogs and home bloopers. nothing like the professional content Netflix was planning. Yet YouTube's popularity exploded. Hastings and his colleagues noticed that millions of people were willing to watch low-quality videos online simply because it was instant and convenient. This was a breakthrough moment. As one Netflix executive later described it, YouTube clearly demonstrated that people were willing to trade fidelity for convenience and speed. Witnessing the popularity of YouTube was a revelation. In other words, viewers didn't need high-definition quality or a perfect experience. They valued being able to click and watch immediately. Hastings realized that the time for streaming had arrived. Netflix abruptly pivoted its efforts. They scrapped the idea of a Netflix downloading box and reallocated resources to build a streaming platform that could play video on demand. This decision was bold, verging on reckless. Netflix was about to invest heavily in a new service that could potentially cannibalize its still-growing DVD business. Hastings was effectively saying, if anyone is going to disrupt Netflix's DVD model, it should be Netflix. It was the kind of self-disruption that business schools preach, but few companies practice because it requires a leader to risk the company's current cash cow for a future bet. But Reed Hastings had the strategic foresight and willingness to take that gamble. He later credited YouTube's explosive growth as the catalyst it gave him the confidence that streaming was not only the future, but that the future was arriving faster than anticipated. Netflix spent 2 intense years re-engineering its architecture and renegotiating content licenses for streaming rights. Finally, in January 2007, Netflix launched its streaming feature, then called Watch Now. At first, it was a modest add-on. Subscribers could stream a limited number of hours of certain titles on their PC. The selection was tiny. About 1,000 titles, mostly older movies and TV episodes. The video quality was middling, and you often had to install Microsoft's clunky player software. By any measure, this initial streaming service was primitive compared to today's standards. But it was a start, the first step toward a new era. Hastings eagerly watched the adoption. Usage was small but growing exactly as expected. Internet speeds were improving year by year, and more content was gradually added to the catalog. Hastings liked to remind everyone internally that DVD is going to last a long time, but it won't last forever. Streaming is the horse we need to bet on. He even had the foresight to strike a deal with device makers. Soon Netflix's streaming app would be integrated into Roku players, Xbox consoles, smart TVs, and any gadget that could connect to the internet. The goal was to make Netflix as accessible as cable, maybe more so. Even as Netflix plunged into streaming, the company had to keep the DVD side running smoothly to pay the bills. This balancing act led to one of Reed Hastings' rare missteps. In 2011, with streaming usage surging, Hastings made a move to separate the businesses entirely. He announced that Netflix's DVD by mail service would spin off into a new company called Quickster, while the Netflix brand would henceforth apply only to streaming. To make matters worse, this came with a hefty price hike for customers who wanted to keep both services, effectively a 60% increase for the combo. The reaction was swift and brutal. Consumers were confused and furious at what felt like a bait-and-switch. Netflix's stock price plummeted, shedding half its value in a matter of weeks. Hastings was stunned by the backlash. In an unprecedented public mea culpa, he recorded a video apology and wrote an open letter, admitting he had botched the execution and failed to respect his customers' preferences. "I messed up," Hastings bluntly told subscribers, promising to do better. The planned Quickster spin-off was quickly scrapped, and Netflix continued as one unified service offering both DVDs and streaming on one platform. This episode, The Quickster Fiasco, became a case study in poor communication and the perils of moving too fast. Hastings called it his biggest blunder of the decade. Yet, in typical fashion, he learned from it. He internalized the importance of taking the pulse of customers and the value of humility. Netflix eventually won back its members' trust by improving the streaming library and keeping the DVD option available for those who still wanted it. In fact, Netflix would continue mailing DVDs as a niche offering all the way until 2023, when it shipped its final red envelope, marking the end of an era. Post-Quickster Hastings doubled down on streaming with even greater resolve, but now with a bit more caution in execution. By 2012, Netflix's streaming service had millions of users and a growing catalog of content licensed from studios. The company had expanded streaming access to Canada, Latin America, and parts of Europe, taking its first steps toward international reach. Hastings could see the writing on the wall for the competition. Around this time, he famously noted that Netflix's biggest competitors weren't just other networks or DVDs. They were things like YouTube and even video games. In one earnings call, he quipped that Netflix was more scared of the popular game Fortnite and user-generated content on YouTube than of HBO or Amazon. His mindset was that entertainment is a vast landscape, and Netflix had to capture as much of the audience's time as possible by offering the best experience. Therefore, Netflix must deliver the best possible experience in content technology and convenience if it wants to win in this fierce competition. Hastings' uncanny foresight was vindicated as the 2010s progressed. Streaming rapidly overtook DVDs. In 2010, Netflix's streaming subscribers surpassed its DVD subscribers for the first time. The cord-cutting revolution, people canceling cable TV in favor of streaming, was underway, accelerated by Netflix's success. By making the pivot early, Netflix enjoyed a massive head start in the streaming market. When other tech and media companies woke up to the opportunity, Netflix had already amassed tens of millions of subscribers and a treasure trove of viewing data to refine its product. Hastings often likened Netflix's trajectory to a long-term chess game, always thinking a few moves ahead. In 2007, he moved his most important piece, the bet on streaming, and it turned out to be a checkmate move for the traditional entertainment model. Netflix Original: Redefining Content and Culture. By the early 2010s, Netflix had transformed from a mail-order DVD service into the world's leading internet television network. But Reed Hastings was not content to let Netflix remain just a distributor of others' content. He wanted Netflix to move up the value chain, to become a creator of content, not just a conduit. This next leap was as radical as the previous ones. What did a tech company know about producing television shows or movies? Quite a lot. It turned out thanks to Netflix's trove of viewer preference data and Hastings' willingness to bring in new expertise. The decision to invest in original programming was driven by both opportunity and necessity. On one hand, Hastings saw that original shows could draw in new subscribers and create exclusive must-see content that set Netflix apart. On the other hand, he anticipated that eventually, the studios and networks might become reluctant to license their best shows to Netflix, a prediction that came true with the later rise of competitor streaming services. To control its destiny, Netflix needed its own hit series and films. "If we don't own the content, we don't control our future," Hastings would later say, a statement that underscored his strategic resolve. So Netflix began funding original productions. The first big swing came in 2013 with House of Cards. This was a bold choice, an expensive cinematic quality political drama series from acclaimed filmmaker David Fincher, starring Kevin Spacey and Robin Wright. Traditionally, such a high-profile series would have premiered on HBO or another major cable network, but Netflix outbid them, committing over $100 million for 2 seasons up front. Industry observers were stunned. This tech company was writing Hollywood-sized checks. Hastings and his content chief, Ted Sarandos, had a strong hunch, backed by data, that House of Cards would resonate with viewers. Netflix knew political thrillers were popular on the platform, and that films by Fincher were widely streamed. Combining those elements in a series made strategic sense. Still, it was a gamble. When Netflix released House of Cards in February 2013, they did something unprecedented. They released all 13 episodes of Season 1 at once. Viewers could binge-watch the entire season in a day if they wanted, rather than waiting week to week for new episodes. This distribution approach broke all the traditional rules of television, which assumed that serialization and weekly suspense were key to a show's success. But Netflix had evidence that a significant portion of its audience loved to binge multiple episodes in one sitting. By embracing that behavior, Netflix wasn't just observing cultural change, it was actively driving it. Binge watching became a mainstream phenomenon, and Netflix was the enabler. When Netflix released all of House of Cards at once, pure binge watching was born. Viewers could devour a whole season with no water cooler waiting period. The impact of House of Cards was enormous. Not only did subscribers flock to watch it, but critics and awards voters took notice. Later in 2013, House of Cards earned 9 Emmy nominations, including the prestigious Outstanding Drama Series category. It was the first time ever that an online-only series had been nominated for top Emmy awards, competing directly with the best of broadcast and cable TV. When director David Fincher won the Emmy for directing House of Cards, Netflix had officially arrived as a creative force. The made-for-Netflix drama House of Cards received 9 Emmy nominations, the first time that an online-only television show has been in the running for TV's top awards. This was a watershed moment. The television establishment was effectively recognizing that quality storytelling could come from a streaming service. It validated Hastings' vision that Netflix could be more than a distribution channel. It could be a brand for original premium content. In quick succession, Netflix released other original series. The quirky prison dramedy Orange is the New Black 2013 supernatural thriller, Stranger Things 2016 regal period drama, The Crown 2016, and a growing slate of content across genres. These shows not only attracted and retained subscribers, they also changed viewing habits. Fans learned to love the all-at-once release model, planning weekend binge sessions and diving deep into discussion threads the moment an entire season dropped. Netflix's choice to forego weekly episode releases was a differentiator that pressured traditional networks to rethink their models. In essence, Hastings and team reprogrammed the rhythms of TV consumption, giving viewers complete control over when and how to watch a series. It was a risky bet. Some wondered if binge releases would short-circuit the buzz that weekly episodes create. But Netflix gained so much goodwill by empowering viewers that the subscriber growth spoke for itself. Original content also gave Netflix something invaluable: catalog exclusivity. If you wanted to watch House of Cards or Stranger Things, you had to have Netflix. There was no alternative. This helped insulate Netflix as competitors eventually emerged, and it built Netflix's brand identity as a home of cutting-edge entertainment, not just a digital video store. In later years, Netflix's originals would garner Oscars like Roma in 2018 for Best Director and dominate water cooler conversations globally. Squid Game in 2021 took the world by storm. More on that soon. The shift to original production turned Netflix into a hybrid tech media company, something truly new in the industry. It's worth noting that Hastings did not personally pick the cast or direct these shows. Netflix's success in content was due in part to empowering creative talent and giving them freedom with some data-informed guidance. Hastings fostered a culture where decisions could be driven by insights gleaned from Netflix's viewing data. But greenlighting a show was ultimately an art as well as science. For example, Netflix knew political dramas and Kevin Spacey films were popular on their service, which supported the decision to greenlight House of Cards. But they also took chances on stories that weren't obviously data-driven, believing in the showrunner's vision, like the nostalgic 80s sci-fi vibe of Stranger Things, which became a massive hit. By the mid-2010s, Netflix was not just riding the streaming wave, it was actively shaping global culture. People started using Netflix as a verb, and the phrase Netflix and chill entered slang as a playful euphemism for cozy on-demand movie nights. Binge-watching marathons became a common weekend activity. The way audiences consumed content, and the expectations they had no ads watch on any device all episodes now, permanently shifted. Traditional TV networks scrambled to adapt, launching their own streaming apps or copying aspects of Netflix's model. In essence, Reed Hastings' vision had catalyzed an industry-wide revolution that extended far beyond Netflix's own subscribers. The streaming revolution had upended how video entertainment is produced, distributed, and enjoyed. The Netflix culture: freedom and responsibility. While Netflix was busy reinventing how we watch content, Reed Hastings was also quietly reinventing something else: how we work. Inside Netflix, Hastings cultivated a corporate culture so unconventional that it became the stuff of Silicon Valley lore. This culture was captured in a now famous 125-slide presentation, often called the Netflix Culture Deck, which Hastings first shared publicly in 2009. It may be the most important document ever to come out of Silicon Valley, Sheryl Sandberg once remarked. So what made Netflix's culture so noteworthy? In short, Hastings built Netflix on principles of freedom and responsibility. He believed that to innovate quickly, a company had to trust its people and remove bureaucratic constraints. Traditional corporate rules, fixed office hours, formal travel policies, hierarchical approval chains were largely absent at Netflix. Instead, employees were given an extraordinary degree of freedom to make decisions with the expectation that they would act in Netflix's best interests. For example, Netflix famously has no set vacation policy. Salaried employees take vacation when they feel it's appropriate. There is also no formal limit on expense accounts. The guideline is simply act in Netflix's interests. This level of freedom was coupled with intense responsibility. Results mattered above all, and mediocre performance was not tolerated. In fact, Netflix would generously pay severance packages to employees who weren't excelling, a practice designed to keep talent density high. As the Culture Deck bluntly put it, adequate performance gets a generous severance. It may sound harsh, but Hastings found that assembling a team of high performers who appreciate candor and autonomy created a positive feedback loop. Top talent attracted top talent. Hastings reasoned that in a fast-changing tech and media landscape, innovation thrives in an environment with minimum rules. Rules and processes, he felt, can lead to complacency and risk aversion. So at Netflix, he and Chief Talent Officer Patty McCord systematically removed controls that might impede agility. They eliminated formal performance reviews in favor of continuous 360-degree feedback. They ditched annual bonuses in lieu of higher straight salaries, betting that the truly driven employees were motivated by impact, not just financial carrots. Most famously, they established a practice of radical candor and transparency. Employees are encouraged to voice dissenting opinions and to openly debate ideas without fear of reprisal. In Netflix's view, a workplace where colleagues can challenge each other's ideas honestly leads to better decisions and continuous improvement. Of course, giving employees this level of freedom only works if you have outstanding people who thrive under such conditions. That's why Netflix's hiring bar was set exceptionally high. Hastings wanted stunning colleagues, a term from the Culture Deck, in every position. The company would rather stay understaffed than hire someone who's merely solid. This was another Hastings lesson from the 2001 layoffs. A small team of A players can run circles around a larger team that includes B players. To attract those A players, Netflix paid top-of-market salaries and offered intriguing challenges. The result was a self-selecting workforce: creatives, engineers, and executives who relished autonomy and who were inherently motivated to do great work. Hastings also believed in context, not control. This means leaders at Netflix aim to communicate the context, the business reality's goals, strategy, and then let employees figure out how to achieve results, rather than micromanaging their methods. For example, instead of a manager telling a team exactly how to execute a project, the manager will outline what outcome is needed and why it matters, and trust the team to devise the best approach. This philosophy pushed decision-making down to the individual level. An engineer or a content buyer at Netflix often has more decision-making latitude than their counterparts elsewhere. As Hastings put it, there are very few companies where the CEO is not the control point. We try to develop a system where you don't need to run everything through me. One striking illustration of Netflix's culture occurred when an employee made an innocent mistake that cost the company a chunk of money. At most firms, that might result in a reprimand or firing. At Netflix, Hastings took it in stride, treating it as a learning moment and moving on, because an environment of fear would undermine the willingness to take risks. In fact, a saying at Netflix is, "If you haven't messed up yet, you haven't taken enough risks." The company's big innovations, from streaming to original content, all involved risk, and Hastings wanted every employee to feel empowered to experiment in their own realm. This culture wasn't without its critics. Some outsiders misinterpreted Netflix's high-performance environment as cutthroat, but insiders often describe it as invigorating, a place where they are treated like adults and surrounded by colleagues who are just as passionate and competent. By promoting candor, autonomy, and accountability, Hastings created a nimble organization capable of pivoting when needed and executing quickly on big ideas. One could argue that without this adaptive culture, Netflix might never have managed the seamless transition from DVDs to streaming or the later leap into content creation. Each of those moves required the whole company to row in the same direction with speed. The culture Hastings cultivated made Netflix more like a fleet of speedboats than a lumbering ocean liner. In 2020, Reed Hastings co-authored a book with Aaron Meyer titled No Rules Rules Netflix and the Culture of Reinvention, detailing these management principles. It became a bestseller and encapsulated the philosophy that has underpinned Netflix's success. The irony is that Hastings, through Netflix, not only changed the entertainment industry, but also left an imprint on management theory. Companies around the world studied the Netflix culture deck, wondering if they too should abolish vacation limits or embrace radical feedback. Few have copied Netflix wholesale. It's a model that perhaps only fits a certain kind of company and workforce. But Hastings undoubtedly sparked a conversation about how workplace norms can be challenged in pursuit of innovation. In the end, Netflix's culture can be seen as an extension of Hastings himself, adventurous nonconformist, demanding, and forward-looking. Staying ahead of the competition. Success breeds imitators, as Netflix's streaming model proved its merit. An onslaught of competitors, old and new, lined up to challenge Reed Hastings' company. Over the years, Hastings often demonstrated a cool head and a long-term perspective regarding competition. He was unfazed by short-term battles, focusing instead on Netflix's broader trajectory. A journalist once asked him about rivals like Amazon Prime Video or HBO, and Hastings responded by emphasizing just how vast the entertainment market is. "We're like 2 drops of water in the ocean of time people spend on entertainment," he said, referring to Netflix and its nearest competitors. In other words, if Netflix kept executing well, there would be plenty of room to grow even alongside others. In the early streaming days, Netflix's main competitors weren't obvious. There was Amazon, which launched its Prime Video service around 2011, and Hulu, a joint venture of major networks, started in 2007, focusing on next-day TV episodes. But for a while, Netflix operated in a largely blue ocean. It essentially was the synonym for streaming. Hastings took advantage of this head start to expand globally and lock in a leadership position. In a dramatic announcement at the Consumer Electronics Show in January 2016, Reed Hastings unveiled that Netflix was going live in 130 new countries effective immediately. In one stroke, Netflix expanded from its existing 60 countries to virtually the entire world, with the notable exception of China. Hastings smiled on stage as he proclaimed, "Today you are witnessing the birth of a new global internet TV network." By the end of 2016, Netflix was available in 190 countries and 21 languages. This blitzkrieg global expansion was classic Hastings, bold tech-enabled and aimed at outflanking any would-be international competitors. It also spoke to his mission to make entertainment universally accessible. If Netflix could achieve worldwide scale, it would become incredibly hard for regional competitors to dislodge it. Sure enough, Netflix's global growth took off. The company crossed 100 million members in 2017, with an increasing share of new users coming from Europe, Latin America, and Asia. But as Netflix grew, the media giants were waking up. Disney in particular posed the most formidable emerging threat. For years, Disney licensed its popular movies to Netflix. Disney's CEO, Bob Iger, even called Netflix more friend than foe in 2015, pleased with the income Disney earned from licensing content to Hastings' platform. However, Hastings knew that wouldn't last. "It's not a zero-sum game," he would say, diplomatically implying multiple services could thrive. But he also quietly prepared for the day Disney would go its own way. In 2017, Disney shocked the industry by announcing it would pull its movies from Netflix and launch its own streaming service, which eventually became Disney+. Hastings publicly greeted this news with zen-like calm. He often said that having strong competitors would push Netflix to improve. "You do your best work when you have great competitors," he remarked. Privately, Netflix had already been racing to build up its slate of originals to replace the content it would lose. By the time Disney Plus launched in late 2019 with Marvel Star Wars and Pixar titles in its arsenal, Netflix had a deep catalog of its own originals and a loyal subscriber base. One could argue that Netflix's biggest competitive advantage under Hastings' leadership was its agility. Time and again, Netflix pivoted or evolved faster than others, from DVD to streaming, from streaming licensed shows to streaming originals from US only to global. So when the so-called streaming wars kicked into high gear around 2019, with Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Apple TV Plus, and others investing billions, Netflix was already an entrenched habit for many consumers. The competition certainly made a dent. Netflix lost some high-profile content like Disney films, or NBC's The Office reruns, which were reclaimed by their owners for new platforms. But Hastings had anticipated this and ensured Netflix wasn't a one-trick pony dependent on others' libraries. Moreover, Hastings maintained a laser focus on user experience as a competitive differentiator. Netflix's app was available on every device imaginable, from smart TVs to game consoles, often with a slick interface and sophisticated recommendation engine. The service rarely crashed even under heavy traffic, a testament to Netflix's tech prowess in content delivery. Hastings loved to point out how flexible and customer-friendly Netflix was. Compared to traditional TV watch on any screen, start on one device and finish on another, cancel anytime online with no penalties. These were simple but powerful features that built trust and goodwill. Even as rivals sprung up, Netflix's brand remained synonymous with ease and innovation. Hastings also made some unorthodox moves as competition heated up. In a strategic shift, Netflix began investing in content beyond TV series, including feature films, documentaries, kids' animation, stand-up comedy specials, and foreign language programming. If someone considered subscribing to a new competitor, Netflix wanted plenty of unique offerings to entice them to stay. For example, Netflix dove into stand-up comedy, signing big names like Dave Chappelle for exclusive specials, something that set it apart from Disney or Amazon. Netflix also spent heavily on Oscar-caliber films like Roma the Irishman and later Don't Look Up, signaling that it could play in the big leagues of cinema, not just episodic TV. Perhaps the most surprising competitive arena Netflix entered under Hastings was local language content for global audiences. This was a brilliant realization. A great story is a great story no matter what language it's told in. Netflix started producing shows in non-English languages, Spanish, German, Japanese, Korean, Hindi, and more, both to win subscribers in those local markets and to export those shows to the rest of the world with subtitles or dubbing. This led to phenomena like Money Heist, La Casa de Papel, a Spanish thriller, and Squid Game, a Korean dystopian drama, becoming massive hits with viewers from Chicago to Cairo. Squid Game in particular was a revelation in 2021. The South Korean series with no big Hollywood stars became Netflix's most watched show of all time, reaching 142 million households worldwide in its first month. It captured the cultural zeitgeist and hit number 1 in 94 different countries. This was the strongest validation yet of Hastings' global vision. A compelling story produced in Seoul could enthrall audiences everywhere from São Paulo to Sydney on Netflix's platform. No traditional network could have achieved that reach so quickly. By nurturing international creators and giving their work a global stage, Netflix built a content library that even the mighty Disney would envy, one that appealed across cultural boundaries. As competitors proliferated, Hastings did make one significant adjustment to Netflix's strategy. For years, he had insisted that Netflix remain ad-free, a stance that delighted consumers but left money on the table compared to traditional TV, which was ad-supported. However, with subscriber growth maturing in North America and competition intensifying, Netflix in 2022 announced plans for a cheaper ad-supported tier. It was an evolution perhaps inevitable as the market changed. Though Hastings was a late convert to the idea of advertising on Netflix, he approached it in the same way he did other challenges: test, learn, and iterate without compromising the core user experience. By the end of 2022, Netflix faced at least a half-dozen serious competitors in streaming. Yet, it still led in scale with over 200 million subscribers globally, a testament to the first-mover advantage Hastings secured. Notably, when Disney Plus crossed 100 million subscribers after its first year, Hastings congratulated Disney, but quipped that it validated streaming as a whole. He remained confident that Netflix's culture of innovation would keep it ahead. And indeed, Netflix continued to break new ground, experimenting with interactive content like Black Mirror Bandersnatch, where viewers choose the plot, dipping into video games and constantly refining its recommendation algorithms. Hastings always emphasized that Netflix was only at the beginning of what internet TV could be. In interviews, he'd muse about the vast potential, how streaming could become as ubiquitous and varied as the internet itself, with personalized content for every taste. One insightful Hastings quote about competition came when he remarked that Netflix's success did not have to come at the expense of others. It's not a zero-sum game. HBO's success, despite our tremendous success, is a good way to illustrate that. He believed multiple services could thrive if they each delivered great value. This almost Zen outlook kept Netflix from engaging in destructive price wars or smear campaigns. Instead, Hastings kept his team focused on what they could control, making Netflix the best service possible. Meanwhile, he maintained a playful attitude externally. When asked what kept him up at night, he joked, "Well, sleep is our biggest competitor after all." It was a humorous line, but also a revealing one. Even at the top of the mountain, Hastings was scheming how to get people to spend more time on Netflix and less time on anything else, even shut-eye. Global impact and legacy. On a typical evening in 2025, a family in Mumbai might gather to watch a blockbuster Hindi action film on Netflix. A college student in Paris might binge a season of a Brazilian crime drama, and a retiree in Texas might unwind with a classic 90s sitcom, all on Netflix. This everyday scene would have seemed nearly unimaginable just 2 decades earlier. Reed Hastings' vision and execution have fundamentally reshaped entertainment habits worldwide. The way we discover stories, the way we consume them, and even the kind of stories that get told have all been influenced by the Netflix model. One of Hastings' most profound impacts is the concept of on-demand personalized entertainment as a norm. We now take for granted that a streaming service will suggest titles finely tuned to our tastes. A comedy fan sees quirky new sitcoms on their homepage. A sci-fi buff gets served the latest space flicks. Netflix pioneered this personalization at scale, using algorithms to analyze viewing behavior and surface content each user is likely to love. The result is that no two Netflix experiences are exactly alike. Hastings often highlighted how technology could enhance entertainment. By reducing friction, instant start times, no more waiting for a show, to air freedom to pause or switch devices and smart recommendations, rather than a one-size-fits-all programming grid. In doing so, Netflix made viewers the curators of their own TV schedules. This empowerment of the audience, giving people control to watch what they want when they want, is arguably Reed Hastings' greatest gift to consumers. It tore down the rigid walls of TV timetables and geographic licensing. A show produced in Turkey could find its perfect fan base in Canada because Netflix would recommend it to those who'd enjoy it. The ripple effect on cross-cultural exchange has been remarkable. Netflix has exposed viewers to content from around the world, quietly broadening perspectives. Shows like Squid Game or Money Heist became global sensations, not in spite of being non-English, but perhaps partly because audiences were hungry for fresh voices, and Netflix made them accessible. Another undeniable legacy of Hastings' Netflix is the demise of the linear TV and rental paradigms. The notion of tuning in at a specific time or driving to a store to rent a physical copy now seems antiquated. Cord cutting, canceling cable subscriptions, accelerated in the late 2010s as millions of households realized they preferred streaming services. In the span of a generation appointment, television has largely given way to streaming libraries. Even major sports leagues and award shows, which long clung to live broadcast, are exploring streaming options. While many forces contributed to this shift, Netflix was the trailblazer that demonstrated a viable path away from the cable bundle model that had dominated since the 1980s. It's telling that by 2020, streaming accounted for a quarter of all television viewing minutes in the United States, and Netflix was the single biggest contributor to that share. The very lexicon of media has changed. Terms like binge-watch streaming and OTT over-the-top content became household words due in large part to Netflix's prevalence. Hastings' legacy also includes the way content is produced. The success of Netflix originals pushed the industry to invest in high-quality serialized storytelling with more creative freedom. Netflix wasn't bound by the same content standards or runtime restrictions as network TV, so creators could be bolder. This attracted top talent to experiment in the streaming space. Additionally, Netflix's practice of renewing shows based on global appeal rather than just US ratings meant niche stories like a retro supernatural series set in a small Indiana town could find longevity if they attracted a passionate worldwide following. In the traditional model, a show with modest US ratings might be axed despite international fans. Netflix changed that equation. In terms of business strategy, Hastings showed the importance of being willing to disrupt yourself. Few companies successfully navigate the kind of transitions Netflix did: physical to digital, rental to original content, domestic to global. Many enterprises have fallen into the trap of milking a cash cow until it's too late to change. Hastings avoided that complacency. He was always looking 5 or 10 years out. When Netflix was at the top of the DVD rental world, he looked to streaming. When Netflix dominated licensed streaming, he looked to originals. When Netflix was winning in the US, he turned to the globe. This forward momentum became part of Netflix's identity, and it flowed directly from Hastings' own restless drive to innovate. Stay ahead of the curve was his oft-quoted mantra, and he embodied it. By the time competitors caught up to where Netflix had been, Netflix was already on to the next chapter. It's also notable that Hastings achieved this while keeping Netflix's ethos customer-centric. Throughout Netflix's growth, the company rarely strayed from prioritizing the user experience. There were moments like the Quickster snafu where this was tested, but Hastings' swift correction there reaffirmed Netflix's commitment to listening to customers. The removal of late fees, the binge model, the ad-free environment for most of its history. These were all choices that endeared Netflix to its users, building a reservoir of goodwill. Hastings' fundamental belief was that if you delight customers, success will follow. That might sound obvious, but in industries historically monopolistic like cable, or those with poor customer satisfaction like telecoms, Netflix stood out as beloved. In surveys, Netflix routinely ranked high in customer satisfaction. People felt in control and got enormous value for what they paid. This trust was crucial when Netflix navigated challenges. Subscribers were more willing to forgive missteps because they recognized the overall value they were getting. As we reflect on Reed Hastings' journey, we see a leader who is part technologist, part storyteller, and part iconoclast. He took a personal annoyance, a late fee, and from it built a company that brought joy to hundreds of millions. He confronted giant incumbents and outmaneuvered them, not through brute force, but through vision and agility. He fostered a work culture that, while not universally emulated, has been widely admired for its boldness in treating people as responsible adults. Under his leadership, Netflix didn't just adapt to change, it provoked change. It forced Hollywood to rethink distribution. It pushed internet infrastructure to improve to handle all the traffic. There was a period when Netflix reportedly accounted for over a third of all US internet bandwidth usage in the evenings. It even challenged governments and censors in various countries to allow a freer flow of information and art. Beyond Netflix, Reed Hastings has also been a notable figure in philanthropy and education, showing that his desire to innovate extends into social spheres. But undoubtedly, his most visible legacy is Netflix and the streaming revolution. In 2023, after over 2 decades at the helm, Hastings stepped down as Netflix's co-CEO and moved into the role of executive chairman. This move was the capstone of a carefully planned succession, handing day-to-day reins to the team he mentored. It marked the end of an era, the founder transitioning out of operational leadership. But by then, the DNA he instilled in Netflix was deeply embedded. Today, the way we watch entertainment bears Reed Hastings' fingerprints. Think about how natural it feels to select any episode of a show at will, to pause and resume whenever to receive a recommendation that introduces you to your next favorite series, or to have a world of cinema available on a screen in your pocket. That is the Hastings effect. He took what was once a clunky, inconvenience-ridden process and replaced it with a seamless user-first paradigm. And he scaled that experience globally, championing the idea that great stories can come from anywhere and be loved everywhere. In the final analysis, Reed Hastings didn't just revolutionize an industry. He helped redefine 21st century leisure and culture. His story illustrates the extraordinary power of a single idea when pursued with conviction and adaptability. From a red envelope in the mail to a red N icon on our screens, the evolution of Netflix under Hastings is a masterclass in innovation. And as millions of viewers hit play next episode at 2 a.m., they might remember Hastings' tongue-in-cheek remark. Netflix competes with sleep. And in that battle, sleep often loses. Hastings set out to entertain the world in a better way, and in doing so, he didn't just change what we watch. He transformed how we talk about and experience entertainment. The revolution he began continues to unfold each time we press play. A quiet but powerful testament to the influence of visionary leadership in the digital age.